This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Hey everyone, I'm Simone, and here are some of today's headlines, briefly. All right, we're starting tonight with the story that seems like it's out of a spy novel. A missing journalist, geopolitical tension, scrutiny of a Saudi regime, and now at the center of all of it, WhatsApp messages. So we now know journalist Jamal Khashoggi checked his phone before he went inside that Saudi consulate in Istanbul. But NBC got their hands on screenshots that show he never read messages sent to him just a few minutes later. So it's more evidence that he never came out. Now, this security video shows Khashoggi supposedly going in with a black minivan parked outside. Turkey says it's on Saudi Arabia to prove that he actually came out. But Saudi Arabia says that he did, but hasn't provided any proof. Now, they say any claims of their involvement in this is baseless. President Trump, though, demanding answers.
Something like that should not happen, and we intend to get to the bottom of it.
Well, it's been a year since all those allegations against Harvey Weinstein came out, and today the guy who was once worshipped by Hollywood went to court. A judge tossed one of the 6 sexual assault charges against him. Now, this one from allegations of forced oral sex in 2004. Lucia Evans said she was a 21-year-old college student and aspiring actress when it happened.
This is not about suggesting that a woman who comes forward should not be believed.
But the claim was dropped because an interview with one of Evans' friends cast doubt on some aspects of her story. Now, there are still 5 other counts looming against Weinstein, though. More and more people started sharing their own experiences after the Weinstein stuff came out. It sparked a broader conversation, and now some are saying that conversation is headed in a different direction. So we'll have more on that in a bit. But for now, moving on to Hurricane Michael. The Florida Panhandle never gets hit this hard. Hurricane Michael crashed into the coast as a Category 4 storm yesterday, killing 6 people and bringing sustained winds of 155 miles per hour. Now, even though it's downgraded to a tropical storm, it's leaving a trail of devastation through Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia. Power lines snapped like toothpicks, thousands of homes completely destroyed, and beaches just littered with debris. Right now, over 1 million people don't have power, and Michael isn't finished just yet. The Carolinas could see 50-mile-per-hour winds and tornadoes. All right, switching gears in a big way here. The Trump-Kanye bromance hit a whole new level today. No, literally, Kanye called President Trump bro in the Oval Office.
Something about when I put this hat on, it made me feel like Superman.
So it was originally planned as a lunch meeting to cover American manufacturing, prison reform, and gun violence. But now the real headline is Kanye's 10-minute monologue about mental health, racism, his relationship with his dad, the universe. You know what? Just roll the clip.
Sometimes people say, this kid has ADD, this kid has ADD. He don't have ADD, school is boring. If he don't look good, we don't look good. This is our president. He has to be the freshest, the flyest. Trump is on his hero's journey right now. And he might not have expected to have a crazy like Kanye West run up and support. But best believe, we are gonna make America great.
And those are your headlines, briefly. Okay, back to Kanye, though, because there's so much to process here. Plenty of people feel Kanye sounded unhinged in the White House today, and there were even questions about whether the appearance itself was exploitative, given Kanye's struggle with mental health. But some of what he said really resonated with conservatives, like Joseph Pinion. I stopped by to get his take on all this.
I do think, obviously, there were some parts that were a little unhinged. We shouldn't be talking about having Yeezus sneakers made in Donald Trump factories. I think the Oval Office is probably a bad place to have that conversation. But I think there's a lot of things that were articulated that resonate with a large swath of Americans. I think that it's already fact that many Americans felt that I'm with her meant that they were left out. I think that when he talks about the fact that, you know, he wishes that the MAGA hat would really be more saying, make America great, not make America great again, and how that actually upsets people in communities of color. I think that's a positive thing. And I think that that is something that might give other people pause when they talk about how the MAGA agenda impacts other people. I think that he is consistently talking about the fact that stop and frisk does fray the trust between police departments and communities of color. I think that that is a good thing to be said in the eyes of the public in front of the President of the United States. These are things that people on both sides of the aisle and communities of color have been talking about for years.
And that conversation will continue because, as you guys know, we are less than a month away from the midterms. Races in battleground states are getting superheated between the Republican and Democratic candidates. But what's funny about all this is that 6 in 10 Americans say they'd actually like to see a viable third party emerge. But those candidates never seem to break through the noise. So I hit the trail to find out why.
New York State right now has turned the Second Amendment into the second suggestion. I want to regulate cannabis like onions.
It's sort of ironic. Larry Sharpe supports legalizing marijuana and the rights of gun owners. Key issues popular on the left and right. And he's polling at around 3%.
I'm trying to make New York a better place. It is literally in a death spiral.
Sharpe is running for governor of New York as a libertarian. And even in the era of polls getting things very, very wrong, his victory seems like a long shot.
Come forward.
So why is it that third-party candidates can't succeed in American politics?
How are you? The system is set up to crush you. They immediately assume if you're not R or D, they shouldn't look at you.
What is the biggest barrier? Is it money? Is it media? Is it...
It's the system itself. Politics in general is a rich man's game, right? It's made for someone who either is part of the establishment and the establishment supports them, or you're wealthy.
So it all comes down to money, right? Well, not necessarily. Hi, this is Simone from NBC News. We called up Donald Green, a political science professor at Columbia University, and he says funding is just a small part of the problem.
For starters, our electoral system gives no benefits to candidates who come in second or third.
This can kind of be explained by this term Duverger's law.
Yes. Duverger's law is a proposition that says if you're awarding one office, you tend to have 2 parties vying for that office.
In other words, the way a country's electoral system is set up determines how many parties it will have. The odds of winning an election in this type of winner-take-all system are much higher when there are only a few parties. The alternative is a proportional representation system. So if a third party wins 20% of a district's vote, it gets 20% of that district's seats, right? Well, now in the States, if a third party wins the same 20%, it gets zilch. It doesn't help that most Americans think of third-party candidates as, well, outsiders.
You know I'm Larry Sharpe, right? Yeah. Outright, you know. Good, awesome. I want to get out, shake hands.
It's got to be grassroots, is what you're saying.
There'll be a good messenger who will get out there. Shame on any politician who will say, we got to find ways to fund the MTA. Shut up!
His campaign strategy is simple. Hit all the towns his better-known opponents won't visit.
The person who shows up at my event is the person who shows up in that voting booth.
His team live casts 3 or 4 times a day as he hammers his message home, then repeat and repeat.
I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have a dog in this fight.
On this night, Sharpe is capping a long day of campaigning with an informal town hall at the VFW. The crowd that shows up is much smaller than anticipated.
Not a good showing for us tonight.
But the few who do turn out like what they see.
Have we ever had anybody come here like this?
No, this is the first time.
Not once.
You mean
I'm surprised our
Cuomo doesn't
mayor-
come sit at this bar?
No.
No, I don't think he'd make it out the door if he did.
I don't even think like Trump makes America great again. Larry has the thing for New York. He has my vote come November.
I've been a Democrat for 45 years, but I'm changing because it's a Democratic Socialist Party.
Too radical.
It's too radical, yes. Hillary Clinton scared me.
Did Bernie scare you?
I don't know if anybody didn't scare.
It's been so hard for anyone who's not a Democrat or a Republican to succeed. Do you think now is the time when it could happen?
It's probably the best time right now.
Linda, Bill, and Philip are hopeful, but realistic. They know their support may not be enough to get a no-name candidate elected.
They're stuck in their ways. They vote Republican because that's what they do.
What is the harm of me being on a ballot other than I may hurt an establishment candidate?
Well, that's supporters of those establishment candidates would say that people who cast a vote for you, that's a protest vote that takes
So
away
what?
from...
That's called your right to vote. You have a right to protest vote.
Yeah, but some say those protest votes do more harm than good. Basically, that third-party candidates are spoiler candidates who only serve to push ideological opponents into office. Teddy Roosevelt, who had already been president as a Republican, lost the 1912 election under his own Bull Moose Party and helped put Democrat Woodrow Wilson in the White House.
Bush must win Florida.
And there are still people plenty mad at Green Party candidate Ralph Nader for siphoning off votes from Al Gore.
George Walker Bush, the new president of the United States.
Scratch out onions, write cannabis, done.
You are running yourself into debt. Some people would say that you're kind of foolish to do this.
And they may be right, but I have two choices. Leave the state that I love, or I try to change it.
The Me Too movement started out as a way for victims to speak more freely about their experiences and hold people accountable. But some say it's drifted from its roots. So the question is, are people misusing it? I'm here with Inez Stepman. She's a senior policy analyst with the Independent Women's Forum, and Francis Maxwell, he's the host of The Breakdown on Facebook. So here's how this is going to work, guys. We're going to have you both start with opening arguments to camera. You'll have 30 seconds for that, and then we'll get into this discussion. Sound good?
Sounds perfect.
All right. So, Inez, we're going to start with you. Now, you feel like people are misusing the Me Too movement.
Yeah, so I think we could all cheer when serial predators like Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby were brought to justice. Men, women, conservatives, liberals, I think we could all cheer about that. But my three questions are, by what standard of evidence are we doing this, if we're going to be bringing people to justice? And two, what counts as assault? And three, is this going to become a political weapon rather than about victims?
All right, Francis, you're up.
Yeah, I think the argument in favor of Me Too is very simple. Sexual assault is one of the most underreported crimes in the United States. Around 2 out of 3 sexual assaults will not be reported. Meanwhile, 1 out of every 6 women are targeted by sexual assault and often face rape or attempted rape. This is an issue that society has to address head on, and the only way we address that is by making women feel, majority of women and men also, feel more comfortable speaking out, and that they will not be vilified and victimized immediately by those in the mainstream media, which has often happened. So in order to embolden them to come forward, we have to show support. Doesn't mean that we just immediately assume guilt, but it means that a conversation has to be had, and I'm all for something that brings that to light.
All right, guys, so obviously this conversation feels very fresh after the Kavanaugh confirmation. And when this movement first started a little over a year ago, it seemed like people were more willing to believe accusers of someone like Harvey Weinstein. Mm-hmm. Why do you feel like the conversation has changed now? It doesn't feel like that way anymore. Francis?
Well, I feel like I would have to disagree in terms of, yeah, Harvey Weinstein himself is an example where more people with corroborating evidence agreed that this is a man who has to be held accountable. But you go back to Anita Hill and you start to see that historically women are often not believed and their stories are not taken into account, and they're victimized, and they feel that their stories cannot be heard.
I think we're talking about very ambiguous situations a lot of the time, and you can see the movement over time from things like what Harvey Weinstein was accused to the Aziz Ansari story a few months ago in Babe.net, right, where it was essentially bad sex. And I think as a culture, as a community, we've lost the language to talk about when sexual experiences might be negative without talking about consent. I don't think consent is the right framework, and I think it's bringing in a criminal framework into what should be a cultural conversation about the fallout of our sexual culture in this country.
Francis, do you want to respond to that really briefly?
I think that it's an important point that you brought up whilst immediately assuming that the woman who came forward in the Aziz Ansari story was simply due to bad sex. I think that goes to show how much more work is needed, that you just assumed that right there, because that's
the story.
Okay, that's read the story, but it's two different perspectives. I think that the Aziz Ansari story is actually a very important one. It sparked a conversation about cloudiness around consent and cloudiness around two experiences. We need to move forward as a society to start understand that those aren't always cut and dry.
I think there's actually some interesting common ground here between social conservatives and the new left, which is, I think we all agree that the current sexual culture is broken. The difference is, as a conservative, we look back and we have the constrained view of human nature, right? Thomas Sowell, Conflict of Visions. We see male nature and female nature as fixed and different. I think there are fundamental differences between women and men, and those psychological differences definitely play out in the way they interact with each other, either romantically or sexually. The very real pain that's out there right now in this kind of casual sex sort of hookup culture that sometimes produces very unpleasant experiences, and more often for women than men, is that we're not going back to the root and saying, okay, how are women and men different? How can we better understand each other? Instead, it seems to be demonizing men and demonizing male sexuality, and I just can't get behind that.
All right, do you think both sides, Inez, are guilty of weaponizing Me Too, this movement?
Well, with regard to Kavanaugh, I think it was definitely the Democrats on the committee, and that's shown in how they dealt with Dr. Ford's testimony. I think it's the left that's weaponizing Me Too, that's politically weaponizing this, and we can see that by the way the Democrats handled this hearing and actually handled the allegations brought forward by Dr. Ford, right? Because Dianne Feinstein sat on this for months. And then this was leaked to the press. This was done in the court of public opinion when it could have been done behind closed doors. That full investigation could have taken place. And in fact, most Americans agree with me. 75% of Americans, that means a lot more than just Republicans and conservatives, think that this was handled badly. And I think it sets a bad precedent going forward with handling these kinds of accusations when you throw them immediately into a super politicized environment. I don't think that's good for victims coming forward. I don't think that's good for innocent men.
But there's questions that they were not asking. The committee was not asking Brett Kavanaugh, pushing him on questions. They were simply allowing him to shout over, which, if you were to say, let's go and have this in a quiet back room, how do you think Brett Kavanaugh would act in a quiet back room compared to how he's acting in front of the world? He was given all the privileges of a white, privileged man in that position of power to scream over senators, telling Feinstein, hold on, I don't mean to interrupt. If Blasey Ford acted like that, her testimony has already been tarnished and torn and thrown apart. Imagine she acted like that.
All right, guys, we could go on all day about Kavanaugh. He is on the Supreme Court now, so we're gonna move on from that just for this moment. But what I am gonna ask you to do is change things up for us here, all right? So this is a part of our show that we like to call Switching Sides, where we push two very smart people out of their comfort zones to confront their own biases. Now, if you had to argue for the other side, what would be the strongest way to do that? Francis, I'll start with you.
I think I'll just double down on what I said. A presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And I think that Inez made a great point, is that doesn't mean by the standard of court of law, but it means going into a situation and understanding that there is two sides to it. Innocence until proven guilty is something I can get behind as long as it applies to all Americans.
All right, I think I just got you to switch sides there with a little asterisk on it. So, yeah, we're going to go with you, Inez. How would you argue for the other side? How would you do that?
Look, I think the other side's strongest argument is that there's an enormous amount of pain here. I think Jessica Valenti really tapped into something when she said the Aziz Ansari story. That sounds normal to a lot of women. It sounds like something that happens in their own lives and their friends' lives. And I think there is something broken there. I just don't agree with the left on the solutions going forward.
These conversations are not easy to have. I mean, that goes without saying. So I thank you guys for coming here and attempting our mental exercise of switching sides. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right, Wall Street had another rough day. The market closed almost 600 points down. That's over 1,000 points in just 2 days. The Dow is at its lowest level since February as investors responded to rising interest rates, trade tensions, and a huge tech sell-off. But you're probably not talking about all this at your dinner table, at least if you're dining with your partner, because when it comes to money and relationships, people would actually rather talk about death. No, seriously. NBC's Left Field explains why it's so hard to talk about money with the ones we love.
Do you have a partner? Are you in love? And do you know how much your partner earns? Well, that was awkward. 1 in 5 people in the US don't know what their partner earns, and everyone hates talking about money.
Health, taxes, religion, politics, and even death. They're all easier for people to talk about than money, but it kills relationships and is the source of most of our anxiety.
10 years after the recession, the way we do or don't talk about money with each other says a lot about the way we think about worth, relationships, and ourselves. Here's some context. In the 10 years since the recession, the US economy has grown. The Dow Jones has reached new heights. The US consumer public is much more confident since the trough in 2008. And when it comes to employment, more people are employed, although wages aren't so high.
And inequality has hit a peak. Fewer people now own more of the wealth. Okay, so I bet you want to know where you're at when it comes to what other people are doing with money in relationships. 32% of women and 15% of men say they'd choose to split the tab when early dating. If you do disclose your salary, this is when it happens. 45% wait until they're moving in with each other, 15% wait until they're engaged, and 10% wait until marriage. 5% of people have a secret credit card or bank account. As for keeping things separate, 13% of baby boomers have separate bank accounts versus 11% of Gen Xers and 28% of millennials. So there's clearly a generational difference in the way we think about and handle our money together. Americans are known for being an individualistic nation, but
what I found was that when the economy was not doing well, Americans tend to become less individualistic. Popular music tends to be more other-focused and less self-focused. Americans are more likely to give their children, their newborns, common names. They focus more on, socializing their children to be more attuned to the needs and concerns of other people. It tends to leave a particularly strong imprint. People who begin their careers during recessions tend to earn less money. They tend to hold less prestigious jobs. But I found that recession graduates are still more satisfied with their jobs.
Okay, so that's growing up during a recession. But now, those people earning less and with more debt are in relationships. And those have changed too. We're getting married and buying homes later. So before, people in relationships used to grow up together through new jobs and salary increases. But now, we're bringing debt and financial baggage to a relationship. So our stuff is just more separate. But some things haven't changed. We still really hate the money thing for a number of reasons. Money is still correlated with success. Talking about a lack of it indicates a lack of success. And there's also cultural lag. Women might be gaining a foothold in the workplace, but that's perceived quite differently. Roughly 7 in 10 people say it's important for a man to financially support a family in order to be a good partner. But only 32% say the same for women. In a world after the recession, with cultural lag and rising inequality, we still have a lot to address. So it might still be super awkward, but perhaps chatting to your partner about money is a good place to start.
Justice Brett Kavanaugh is on the bench now, and while he was busy fending off allegations, one case was already argued without him. It's something far uglier, far slimier, and something that poses a very real threat to our way of life. Yep, that sound that you just heard that sounds like a human snoring, it's from the dusky gopher frog. This nefarious amphibian and all her lovely lady lumps are at the center of a Supreme Court case that could determine how far the government will go to protect endangered species. But can the government claim private land as a potential habitat? Well, we don't know just yet. See, the land in question spans about 1,600 acres in Louisiana and belongs to this guy, Edward Poitevent, who has a decadent Louisiana last name, by the way. Now, one day he got a call from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they told him that this tribe of threatened frogs might need to use his land. Well, the lumber company that leases Poitevent's property says that would ruin their business, so they're suing the U.S. government. And that's why all of this has reached the Supreme Court. Now, here's the twist. You ain't gonna find no dusky gopher frogs in Louisiana. You gotta go 50 miles over to Mississippi to see the last couple hundred of them hopping around in the wild. Now, historically, about 50 years ago, the frog did call the Louisiana Bayou home before habitat destruction and drought drove the little buggers next door to Mississippi. So that's why environmentalists are eyeing Louisiana as a potential new habitat if they grow out of their current one. In fact, this frog used to be called the Mississippi gopher frog, but it was curiously renamed the dusky gopher frog somewhere around the time all this legal mess started.
Basically, we'll go extinct in the wild if the habitat isn't there to, support them. So they become, kind of relics that we keep in captivity.
If this frog goes extinct, we could lose out on some health benefits. Researchers are studying the frog's secretion for potential cancer-fighting properties. But everyone agrees it would take a lot to get this new habitat ready. I mean, this is no 2-star frog motel, okay? This is a frog resort. The Fish and Wildlife Service estimates this habitat makeover could ultimately cost the landowners, I don't know, up to $30 million. I mean, we're talking about some high-maintenance amphibians here. They need an open canopy overhead, lots of natural light, clear pathways to move freely. And when these dusky gophers want sexy froggy time, they need sexy froggy ponds that only appear seasonally. Yeah, they're called ephemeral ponds, which sounds like a short-lived Dawson's Creek spinoff where Joey and Pacey live happily ever after in suburban New Jersey. Now, so far, federal courts have been Team Frog, affirming the Fish and Wildlife Service's interpretation of a critical habitat. The law says that's an area where the animal currently lives or could live. And even though the Trump administration is trying to rein in the Endangered Species Act, they're actually in agreement with environmentalists on this one. And that even shocked Poitevin, according to an interview in the Washington Post. Now, without Kavanaugh, conservatives on the Supreme Court don't have the votes to rule in favor of the landowners. So, with only 8 out of 9 justices, we could have a tie here, which would keep the habitat protections in place. Or the court could decide to hear the case again, this time with Kavanaugh. So if Kavanaugh sides with landowners, Louisiana's first frog resort is likely dead in the water. Well, that's our show for tonight, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.